We request Professor Dr. Sharvari Shukla to escort the dignitary onto the dais. We extend our warm welcome to our chief guest, Professor Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar.
Good morning to one and all present here. On behalf of Symbiosis Statistical Institute, I, Neha Ancharian, along with Prashanti Radhakrishnan, students of MSc Applied Statistics, welcome you all to the inaugural ceremony of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar Memorial Lecture.
This morning, we'll be featuring a special performance by Abhishek Jog, Avipsha Bakshi, and Saisha Kelkar, our students from MSc, who will be singing Ganesh Vandana. Please join us in welcoming our performers.
गणनायकाय गणदैवताय गणाध्यक्षाय धीमहि गुणशरीराय गुणमण्डिताय गुणेशानाय धीमहि गुणातीताय गुणाधीशाय गुणप्रविष्टाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गजेशानाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गजेशानाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय धीमहि गन्धर्वराजाय गन्धाय गन्धर्वाश्रवणप्रणयिने गाथानुरागाय ग्रन्थाय गीताय ग्रन्थाय तत्त्वविदे गुणिने गुणवते गणपते गानचतुराय गानप्राणाय गानान्तरात्मने गानोत्सुकाय गानमत्ताय गानोत्सुकमनसे गुरुपूजिताय गुरुदैवताय गुरुकुलस्थाय गुरुविक्रमाय गुरुप्रवराय गुरुवे गुणगुरवे गुरुदैत्यकलाक्षेत्रे गुरुधर्मसदाराध्याय गुरुपूज्यपरित्राते गुरुपाखण्डखण्डकाय गीतसाराय गीततत्त्वाय गीतगोत्राय धीमहि गूढगुल्फाय गन्धमत्ताय गोचरप्रदाय धीमहि गुणातीताय गुणाधीशाय गुणप्रविष्टाय धीमहि एकदन्ताय वक्रतुण्डाय गौरीतनयाय धीमहि गजेशानाय भालचन्द्राय श्रीगणेशाय धीमहि
Thank you for the melodious performance. Respected dignitaries and participants, it is now my pleasure to introduce Professor Dr. Sharvari Shukla, who serves as the director and a professor at Symbiosis Statistical Institute. Her extensive career as a medical statistician spans across various research institutes, and she has provided guidance and advisory support to numerous pharmaceutical companies and institutions. Driven by her passion for translating research into practical applications, she pursued training in epidemiology, epigenetics, and clinical trials. She is currently involved in managing a range of national and international research projects, including receiving grants from DST for big data analytics, and is also a recipient of the SERB Matrix grant along with the Indo-Canada under IC Impact scheme. Dr. Sharvari Shukla collaborates closely with a team of epidemiologists and clinical scientists. Her areas of expertise encompass longitudinal data analysis, statistical machine learning, modeling simulation, and big data analytics. Her prolific academic career is evidenced by more than 75 research publications in international and national journals. And she also generously contributes to the academic community by serving as a reviewer for various international journals. Ma'am, we request you to kindly welcome our esteemed guests. Over to you.
So thank you, Prashanti and Neha, for all these nice words. However, I feel that my best introduction is I'm the student of all the professors who are sitting in first line. So very good morning to each one of you. So respected Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar, who has kindly consented to come offline, that is first thing. And another thing is she has permitted us to start with the memorial lecture by name of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar. So ma'am, it is indeed pleasure to have you here today. So all our leadership, Honorable Chancellor Sir, Professor Muzumdar, our Pro-Chancellor Ma'am Dr. Vidya Evadekar, Vice Chancellor Dr. Rajni Gupteji. Today, because of some other commitment, they could not make it. However, I know that all their blessings are with us for this particular lecture and going forward for lecture series. Our Pro-Host Dr. Rajiv Evadekar will be joining us at afternoon for the award ceremony. So, all my professors, then invitees from National Chemical Laboratory, then invitees from ICER, Rutuja ma'am, who has again kindly accepted our invitation to deliver the invited industry talk. Then all other colleagues, most importantly, the family members from the Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, then all students who joined us from various colleges, from Satara, from TC College, then from Ferguson College, and so many other colleges. All delegates. So, on behalf of Symbiosis Statistical staff, student, our PhD scholars, and all our alumni, I take this opportunity to welcome each one of you for this particular first Professor V.S. Huzurbazar Memorial Lecture. So during interaction at morning, many of you were wondering and they were asking me that about starting this particular memorial lecture, and I felt that yes, I should be telling them about this particular opportunity. So this year we started implementing national education policy. So we are offering BSc program, BSc honors and honors with research. So all our BSc program or UG program are 4-year programs across SIU. So where in BSc we offer BSc program major in applied statistics and data science and minor in business studies. Along with that, we do have a very blended kind of program structure as per NEP. We even offer a lot of multidisciplinary courses and it will be very interesting to understand that we even do have games of uncertainty, then statistics for nature, Shruti Ganit. In fact, Leelavati is part of our program structure when it comes to the undergrad and the implementation of the NEP. So it is good sort of blended. And another thing which I feel that we are lucky enough to have all the internal in-house faculty member to implement all these programs, because I really feel that uh, we need to have that kind of in-house talent to grow the institute. So our master's program, which is flagship program, where we offer masters in applied statistics, where we do have four specializations. One is data science, another one is industrial statistics, third one is biostatistics, and fourth year, this year, we started with even actuarial statistics. So I'm very happy that with this particular flagship sort of program, it is very well set program, where we do get huge amount of applications during the admission, and with this selection process and all these things, we even get 100% placement right from the beginning. All our alumni are actually providing a lot of critical decisions to the industry, data driven, and so many things. So we also do have the PhD programs, right? We do have almost 18 students working on their research ideas. We also do conduct many activities. We are student-centric activities where students get an opportunity to interact with many industry people. In fact, we do have series like on one Saturday we conduct the session related to the Indian knowledge system. On one Saturday of a month, we started with conducting the sessions related to the Indian statistical services. On one Saturday, all statisticians walk together, to which we do call it as a Sankhya Darshan. And this particular activity is really catching up. Any one of you who wish to walk with us and discuss the statistical idea, all of you are welcome for this Sankhya Darshan. And on one Saturday, we invite industry people so that we can have good industry connect and all students understand the requirement of industry. So with this, we do have more than 300 plus students, then PhD scholars. So I feel that it is really very good opportunity for all my students if we start with this kind of memorial lecture. So recently we completed 5 years. We have celebrated the 5th Foundation Day of Symbiosis Statistical Institute, and I think that this is high time for us to start with this kind of memorial lectures so that all my students, faculty members can get an opportunity to understand the contribution of the legendary statisticians. They can even understand how they work, where they work, and then what is their actual contribution when it comes to the application of it. Nonetheless, we also do have going forward, we also do have the at afternoon session invited industry talk. That is again, I feel that good opportunity for our students, even for other members, to understand what is the requirement of industry when it comes to the application of statistics. And with this, I feel that all of us should catch hold of this kind of ideas, and I am really looking forward to have this kind of sessions very frequently, and we plan to have at least annual event with this particular memorial lecture. So every year we are going to have the memorial lecture by name of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar. So with this, I once again thank you, ma'am, for coming all the way from USA and gracing the occasion. Nonetheless, I welcome each one of you once again, and I'm really looking forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you for addressing the gathering, ma'am.
Let us begin the program on an auspicious note with the traditional lamp lighting ceremony. I would kindly request our esteemed chief guest, Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar, the director of SSI, Dr. Sharvari Shukla, the faculty members, Dr. Priya Deshpande and Dr. Madhulika Mishra, and Tejas Gulati, student representative from SSI, onto the dais. Let the symbolic act of kindling the lamp illuminate the path to knowledge and wisdom, setting a luminous tone for the event. Thank you, ma'am. We request you to kindly take your seat. Moving on to the next segment, I would like to take this opportunity to introduce our chief guest, Professor Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar. Professor Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar, a distinguished academic and accomplished statistician, hails from Ames, Iowa, USA. Her impressive educational journey includes a PhD in statistics from Colorado State University in 1992 under the guidance of Professor Ronald W. Butler, preceded by an MA in economics from Vanderbilt University in 1988 and a BA in an independent major encompassing political science, history, sociology, and Spanish from Grinnell College in 1984. Notably, during her junior year in 1982 to 83, she ventured to Croatia as part of a study abroad program and subsequently worked as an au pair during the spring and summer. Throughout her career, Dr. Huzurbazar had displayed a profound commitment to leadership and academic excellence. She completed the Academic Leadership Academy at Pennsylvania State University in 2018 to 2019 and received numerous accolades, including being elected as a Fellow of the American Statistical Association in 2017 and gaining membership in the International Statistical Institute in 2022. Dr. Huzur Bazar's professional journey chronicles a diverse range of roles and responsibilities. Starting in February 2024, she will serve as a professor and director of the data science track in the PhD program at Emory University's School of Nursing in Atlanta, Georgia. Prior to this, she held various positions at West Virginia University, including Associate Director and Professor of Data Science, where she founded the Data Science program. She also served as the chair of the Department of Biostatistics and worked as a professor in the Department of Mathematics and the Department of Biostatistics. Additionally, her experience extends to the University of Wyoming and various visiting and adjunct positions at institutions such as University of North Carolina, Charlotte, and North Carolina State University.
Professor Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar is known for her research prowess, focusing on adapting statistical methods for applications across diverse fields such as bioinformatics, geology and geophysics, petroleum and chemical engineering, and sociology. She has an extensive history of research collaborations both within and outside of her institutions, fostering interdisciplinary connections and contributing to the advancement of statistical methods. She has also been involved in administrative roles, including serving as Deputy Director of the National Science Foundation's Statistical and Applied Mathematical Sciences Institute and playing a pivotal role in initiatives related to diversity and graduate education. Her career is marked by a commitment to academic excellence, leadership, and interdisciplinary research contribution. We extend a warm and enthusiastic welcome to Professor Dr. Snehalata Huzurbazar as our distinguished guest. So, welcome, ma'am, and we eagerly anticipate the knowledge and perspectives you will share with us.
We now request our director, Professor Dr. Sharvari Shukla, to felicitate our chief guest and extend a token of appreciation. Thank you, Sharvari ma'am, and I humbly request you to join the audience. Over to you, Snehalata ma'am, to address the audience.
Thank you very much for being here. I'm really going to talk about the legacy of my father, Professor V.S. Huzurbazar. So it's statistics and data science, but what I really want to focus on is people like him, well, in this case him, the pioneering and pivotal work that they did, and how we should now really look at it as we morph from that first phase of statistics to this next phase where we have to integrate with data science. We can't sort of have statistics in a vacuum like we've had for many, many years. Okay, I am going to try to talk slowly because I know my accent is maybe hard to understand. Please interrupt me if you have questions. Okay, this is what I'm used to doing in the US. Okay, so first of all, I'd like to thank everyone here, especially Professor Sharvari Shukla. But more than that, exactly 1 year today, on the 15th of September last year, is when she and the late Professor Sharad Gore and I met on Zoom. And that's the first time, and it's September 15th is my father's birthday. So it all sort of gelled together. And so that was when they proposed starting this lecture series. And we had a very nice conversation, and especially because what I had done in the data science program at West Virginia is more or less what she had been doing with applied statistics and data science here. And so it was just very nice to have that conversation. And then the various people, Dr. Muzumdar and Dr. Vidya Yarwadekar and Rajani Gupte, I haven't met them. I think I've met Dr. Muzumdar when I was little. I don't remember, but I know I did. Over the next few days, hopefully I will see them. And then more than anything, all our relatives and friends who have put up with us the last couple of weeks as my daughter and I got adjusted. Sometimes I got misadjusted to being here. We've sort of stayed with different people, and one of my dear friends who's here, who did her MBA at Symbiosis way back, Sangeeta, we've been friends since we were 3 years old. And so it has been very nice to see everyone, and more than that, to have their support. I'd like to apologize for sort of incomplete photographs that I'll present here. I have a huge number of photographs that I inherited from my parents, my father, with all sorts of different statisticians and so on. However, right now, this is a really rushed visit. I'm in between jobs. I'm technically without a job right now. I'm without a house. I left my position at West Virginia University. All of our stuff is in storage, and I will be starting at Emory in February. So I went through storage and picked out whatever photographs I could find. So it's a very hodgepodge set of photos, but I hope to sort of have a better set for future lectures for other people. And then any of the errors and dates, facts, etc., are me putting together information that, some of it was compiled from when I was very young. Okay, so what I'd like to do is sort of weave together different pieces. Wait, can we turn that light off or turn it down, please? Yeah, thank you. Otherwise I'm being blinded. Okay, so my father was born in 1919, and anyone like those of us that look at numbers, you went from 1919 and he passed away in 1991. There's some word for that permutation, but and his contributions to statistics obviously started later, so really from 1946 onwards. One of the things, since there are so many students in the audience, Over the last several years, I think I've come to realize that when you're young, you look at people's career paths and lives and you think everything's linear. You think everything, you do this, then you do that, then you do that, and your personal life and your professional life are separate. Nothing affects anything else. And if you don't excel at your professional life because things happened in your personal life, you are at fault. That is not true. So especially for all the younger people in the audience, life happens, personal and professional lives intertwine. And one of the things I've taken to doing is looking at how people have dealt with positive and negative things in their lives. And I think when you're young, you can learn a lot from seeing how people face various difficulties and overcome them and how they tackle challenges, okay? So I think it's important to sort of look at personal and professional together, especially when you're looking at someone's contributions. And also in his case, this was all happening as statistics was really becoming a discipline. Statistics did not exist as a discipline when he went to get his PhDs. His PhD actually was technically in mathematics. And then more than that, at this point in 2023 now, what we have is statistics changing again. It has been changing over the last 20, 25 years, but I think it's really accelerated. And the way we have been teaching and looking at statistics, I personally think really needs to change. Because the way data was collected about 100 years ago is not how data is collected now. What was meant by data 100 years ago is not what's meant by data now. Everything is very different, and we have to update and we have to change things. And this is a constant struggle all over the world. I mean, in the US, there are constant, people are bashing their heads against each other, arguing over these things. So I think at this point, we really should be thinking about statistical data science. Statistics as a field is pretty solid. It's got its foundations pretty well sorted out, but now it's the next stage. And I think of this as very computational statistics and as statistical data science. Okay, so some of these, my very vehement opinions will come through, and happy to discuss them. Okay, so my father's early life and education. So he was born in Kolhapur. He was the fifth of 8 children. There were 2 older brothers and 2 older sisters. And it was a fairly illustrious family. I had, these are bits and pieces that I've pieced together from older cousins. His grandfather, so my great-grandfather, Abba Sahib Huzurbazar, was a scholar and a teacher, and he taught English to Shahu Maharaj of Kolhapur. So there's one of my cousins has like a certificate that the Viceroy of India gave my great-grandfather, etc. Anyway, that aside, his father, Bhau Sahib, was a scholar and a teacher of Sanskrit and mathematics and English. And apparently he wanted to become an engineer, but his health was pretty poor. And so he basically ended up teaching usually mathematics. He worked in as a manager in one of Shahu Maharaj's factories for a while. But I think the more critical event really, which I sort of later pieced together, was that my grandmother died in childbirth. That was pretty common in those days, right? Like dying in childbirth was how many women's lives ended. His older sister, so the oldest sister was already married and had children, but the second oldest sister, Sumati, well, at the time Krishna Huzurbazar, she was studying for her master's in Sanskrit exams, and she ended up taking care of her newborn baby brother and studying for these exams. So when she did get married, when she agreed to marry Bibi Narayakar, one of the conditions that she told my sister years later, one of her wishes was that if any of her siblings in those days, but really her brothers, wanted to come and study mathematics at Banaras Hindu University, where Professor Narayakar was the head of mathematics, that he would welcome them. And his personality, I remember him from when I was a child, he was very welcoming to students and so on. Anyway, so 2 of her brothers ended up studying at Banaras Hindu University. So my father and then my uncle, MS Huzurbazar, who later was at Science College in Mumbai. And the number of students that he trained, I still run into people in the US, many of whom are now retired, who will, I'll run into them somewhere at some academic thing and they'll say, it's because of your uncle that I ended up getting my PhD and so on. So this was sort of this I don't know, this family dynamic of where this is what they did. So my father ended up getting his bachelor's in mathematics from Bombay University in 1940, and then his master's in mathematics, he went to Banaras in 1942, and he was the Chancellor's Gold Medal winner. And then after that, for 3 years, he was a lecturer in mathematics at Rajaram College in Kolhapur, so he went back to Kolhapur. After that, he went to Cambridge to do his PhD. So at that point, and this is again, sort of interesting, I don't know, history really. So this is more than that, almost 100 years ago. So before my father got there, there were sort of three illustrious people. One who became a statistician, P.V. Sukhatne, V.V. Narayakar, who was a mathematician, and then there was a third person, D.S. Agashe, who ended up teaching mathematics at St. Xavier's in Mumbai and wrote a huge number of really influential books. So they were all at Cambridge together. And it's interesting because they're all the children and the families are all sort of intertwined. And, this is, I think of it 100 years later, and I still can call in these various people and, sort of show up, and it's a very close family relationship. So anyway, so this was sort of part of this bigger framework. So the thing that has always struck me is that when my father left for Cambridge, he left British India. And when he came back to independent India. And, I knew him, he was much older by the time we were born and so on. But the things that I sort of pieced together, we met some friends in Pune on one of our visits years ago. And what I didn't realize is, how, when you think about it, right? Someone in their 20s in British India, you sort of wonder what sort, were they politically active? Were they, how did they think about all this? Even if you're studying mathematics, you're doing this in a larger society around you. So from what I've pieced together, he was definitely towards the independent, not go out in the streets and march, but definitely very sort of pro-independence. We need to do things. We need to build India. So that's sort of something I had to piece together. But the bigger thing is that, at that point, there were loads of financial hardships. His family never had money. It was, so he had to piece together, as most students did in those days, different scholarships just to go do his PhD. And when we were clearing up stuff that was still in Pune, I remember finding he'd saved all of the receipts, so there would be, little batches of money that would be transferred from these different fellowships and so on. And, these are mathematicians, right? They keep track of all of the little ins and outs sort of accounting. Anyway, so there was a Holkar Fellowship from Banaras Hindu University. There was one from Bombay University, and then from the Tata Endowment for Higher Education of Indians. The other thing, and these stories I knew because he did talk about this, when we were sort of teenagers and such, is post-World War II England was a very difficult place to live. So whether you were Indian or British or whatever you were, it was just a horrible place to live. Food was always short. And on top of that, he had, you had to go find a place to live, right? There were no hostels like we have this point. So I know he went through a whole sequence of, and there were usually landladies because a huge number of men had died in the war. So you had women that were, let out rooms, and the racism. That was a pretty prevalent thing. And that featured into the statistics part as well. And there are stories of how one of our very well-known statisticians, Fisher, was He was a eugenicist, he was a racist, and he treated his Indian students very differently than his British students, and so on. So this is, stuff that we'd sort of buried for a long time, and now I think we talk about it more openly. So that was sort of one piece. So that was the day-to-day, how to live, how to just get to university and so on. The other part that was sort of this funky landscape was that statistics was not a field of study yet. It was an evolving landscape. The statistical laboratory at Cambridge was established in 1947. He got there in 1946, and that was a long, long project that the Department of Mathematics undertook to establish that laboratory. So it wasn't a department, it was the statistical laboratory. And if you look at the Cambridge University Stats website, there's a very nice history of all of this, including some of the colorful stuff, various people at each other's throats, really, and so on. But this wasn't unusual. Most of the departments in the US also started about the same time, in the 1940s and 50s. So the first statistics department was really the biostatistics department at Johns Hopkins University. And then after that, the stats departments in the US, I think the earliest ones were North Carolina State, Virginia Tech, and ironically, the University of Wyoming. They all started at the same time. And they were all started very differently. Iowa State started out as a stats lab, and then it became a department later, I think late 40s or early 50s. So this was, statistics as a field was sort of coming into its own. So if we think about, a lot of times, like after teaching for many years, I realized that we never tell students the history of statistics. We sort of just start with Greek letters and Latin letters, and this is a parameter, and this is data, and sort of start from there very mathematically. But statistics, and this is a very brief, a few sort of bits and pieces here and there, but statistics really did not start as mathematics. It is not a subfield of mathematics. Statistics started out as trying to solve problems, and the math sort of followed. But more than that, a lot of times statistics was really intertwined with gambling problems, betting problems, right? Wherever there was uncertainty. So the binomial distribution came out of that. The normal distribution has, and one of the other themes to keep track of is that discoveries or developments especially in the mathematical sciences, don't just sort of happen and then things, everyone accepts it or everyone knows about it, especially in the old days, right? Things get invented and reinvented in different ways over and over again. And I think in the modern era now, what we're seeing is the same things happening with data science. So what we used to call cluster analysis has been reinvented, I don't know how many times. Principal components analysis has been reinvented several times over the last 30, 40, 50 years. And everyone calls it something different, but these things come out of the need for solving problems, okay? So the normal distribution actually goes back more than 100 years before Gauss used it and sort of reinvented it. So de Moivre ended up introducing, he noticed this what do you do when you have really huge binomial coefficients and so on. But all of this sort of came out of gambling and trying to sort out probabilities. So the normal distribution, which is one of the workhorses of statistics, is from the 1700s, but it really sort of came into its own by the 1800s. Something like least squares, right? Least squares is something we teach in elementary school, right? Effectively, like you can sort of intuitively get the idea across. What was the reason for doing this? It wasn't that somebody sat there and thought, oh, let me minimize some sum of squares. I have nothing else to do. No, Gauss was trying to sort out errors in astronomy data. So it was it was basically a measurement error problem. And that's how the Gaussian distribution showed up. The chi-square test. This was a very heuristic development from Carl Pearson. He had categorical data counts, and he was trying to fit those. And what do? You try and get things as close as possible, right? So you get your best guess. This did not come out of mathematics. This came out of completely, effectively data fitting. what we as statisticians for a long time have sort of minimized, right? You wouldn't want to actually take numbers and do something. So anyway, the other interesting, I think the most interesting one to me is the t-test. So the t-distribution was around for a while. Helmert transformations, he sort of came up with a version, then Carl Pearson, it was one of the Pearson type something distributions. But where it really became the t-test was a very practical problem, and that had to do with making sure that you had quality control at the Guinness brewery. So this is when you were now, instead of having your microbrewery, like that's the vogue now, even in Pune, right? You actually didn't want to go to your corner pub, you wanted to produce beer and sell it. And so Gossett worked at the Guinness brewery, and he was trying, if you're trying to sell a product, you can't have a lot of variation. There needs to be, you need to have customers come back because they know what they're going to get. And so it was looking at the properties of barley in small batches, in small samples, and it was a small sample problem. And so Gossett kept data and tried to figure out, how exactly do you test this? How do you have something within what we would now think of as a quality control problem? And the math of it sort of got a little more complicated. He interacted with Fisher, and the t-test ended up being published as students' t-test because, same themes as now. The Guinness brewery did not want him using his name because he worked at the brewery. So that's why it was called students' tea distribution for a long time. So, in some sense, this Guinness brewery is like the beer for statisticians, right? Anyway, so this was sort of all these different practical problems. This is how statistical methods were developed, but they were, one test here, one distribution there, etc. So it wasn't until the 1920s that things started getting unified. And they did not get unified because of mathematicians. They got unified because of a geneticist and a geophysicist. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about, and I want you to think about what sort of data you get when you're a geneticist and what sort of data you get when you're a geophysicist. So the two giants of what they really are the two giants of modern statistics are Ronald Fisher, and for Bayesians, it's Harold Jeffreys. And at this point, I don't think there's much of a differentiation between the philosophy of being a Bayesian and being a frequentist, because when you start solving problems, you use the tools that help you. So Ronald Fisher was a geneticist, and he was at the Rothamsted Agricultural Station. Okay, this is the 1920s. So what does genetics consist of? Nothing's been sequenced. DNA has not been discovered. We're basically talking about take two plants of peas and crossbreed them, right? This is very hands-on agricultural experiments. So what Fisher was trying to do is trying to figure out what sort of variation you get when you breed different varieties, and what sort of background variables can you control. So if you can control the amount of water something gets, the amount of sunlight something gets, things that in statistics we now call factors, then you can look at the output. But this is genetics that's very, very different than what we think of today. But the biggest thing is, in Fisher's world, you could design things. You could plant something here or plant a different variety there, right? So you had control over how you set up your experiments. At the same time, there was Harold Jeffreys, who was a geophysicist, a physicist, mathematician as well. And he held the same chair in physics that Newton held a couple of centuries before. So now think about geophysics. Can you control anything or do any experiments? So think about like the earthquake that just happened in Morocco. Like last week, there was this giant earthquake in Morocco. It's all observational data. You cannot say, okay, this week we're going to have an earthquake in Morocco. Next week we'll have one in San Francisco. And then we'll look at what the differences are. And, we've got a nice designed experiment. Geophysics doesn't work that way. Wait, there's something off. Oops. No. Sorry. Okay. So Jeffries came out of observational data. Science, but a lot of science you can't design your experiments. You have to live with observational data. And I think this frames your worldview. If you can design your experiments, this is, I think, what made Fisher very much you control all of these things and then you look at the output. But in the world of Jeffries, you have your current understanding of the science. You now there's an earthquake in Morocco, you get more information, now you update your understanding of science. And so this constant updating as data comes in is the Bayesian worldview. This setting up an experiment and controlling things and looking at the output and comparing across different treatment groups, etc., is this classical statistics worldview. However, in the 20s, these two personalities were, well, let's just say they didn't get along. They didn't just not get along, but there was a lot of politics, right? There's always a lot of politics. So Fisher was a very cantankerous person, I guess. He had arguments with a lot of people. Jeffries, personality-wise, was very, very mild, meek. He spoke very softly. He was really an introvert. And so what you ended up having was, but they were both these intellectual giants. So there are stories of what became the statistics department eventually at Cambridge, when they had tea, they wouldn't have tea at the same time. So Fisher's group would come in, they would have tea, they would leave, everything would get cleaned out, then the Jeffries people would come in. So they didn't even want to be in the same room. Okay, so the reason I'm going into this is because this is what my father landed in. This was the Cambridge he landed in. And more than that, this is, he left India in 1946. So again, there's no WhatsApp, there's no email, there are no computers. It is stupidly expensive to send any correspondence by airmail. Like I remember as a child, you put airmail labels on envelopes. Otherwise they went by ship, I guess. So communication was slow, it was expensive, and you had to wait for your letter to get there, and then the person would answer and the letter would come back. So you couldn't just Google and see who you should go work for at Cambridge. You had to use information from the people that were around you. And so V.V. Narikar he was a mathematician and a physicist, and he had been at Cambridge. And so through him and others, my father ended up contacting Jeffries to see if he could work with Jeffries, and Jeffries was open to that. So this whole background of Fisher versus Jeffries, he had no idea he was entering this, right? I mean, how could he? So the way that PhDs happened at Cambridge at the time, you attended lectures, professors gave lectures, you attended lectures, and then you sort of formed, you worked on your thesis. So it was your job to put together all the information, you listened to various people, and so on. So he attended lectures by Fisher, by Jeffries, many others. And the reality was that for a long time, the first 2.5 years, he really didn't make much progress. Jeffries was very hard to communicate with. They would write, he would basically have to write and slip his written work under his door, and then Jeffries would respond. So there was, it was hard. And the guidance at first was a little bit sporadic. It's not that Jeffries was uninterested, it was just his personality. At the same time, there was Wishart. So Wishart at the Wishart distribution, right? That's how we know these people now. So Wishart, and I've heard stories about Wishart and his politicking and so on from various people. So he was promoting this diploma in statistics that he had started. So this is effectively the same sort of thing we do in these days, right? You have sort of someone's not making progress. Well, here's get this quick degree and go out and work, right? Which is fine for a lot of people. Not everybody needs to do a PhD. In fact, I think sometimes that's the worst thing one could do. But anyway, this was for political reasons, because for Jeffries or for Wishart and all of the other people in the department, in the math department who were statisticians, Jeffries was the outsider, right? Why are you working with Jeffries and you're not making progress? So Wishart tried to convince him, and a lot of other people also tried to convince him, basically dump Jeffries, get this diploma, and move on. But there was some person in sort of the educational, whatever, some role who said, no, you pick Jeffries, give it some time. And that was probably the best advice that he followed. Henry Daniels, who was hired about the same time. So he came in. Dennis Lindley was a Bayesian, was hired a little bit later. So all of these people were arriving at Cambridge. And what I know is that for my father's PhD to happen in our modern American terms, his PhD committee had to be stacked. Because if you had too many people that supported Fisher, then there would be problems. So basically, Henry Daniels ended up on this committee, which for me personally later on was interesting. I also know, even though he never talked about it, is that he spent a lot of time hiking in the Lake District. So I used to think of my father as this very studious, I'd never, as a child, never really seen him go off and hike and so on. I had no idea that in his 20s, he was spending time hiking in the Lake District. So I've got books, guidebooks from the English Lake District from the 1940s. And back then, you'd go off on a hiking thing and everyone would sign their name and such. I have no idea who most of these people are, but it is interesting. But the hiking, it's important because it's and this is again, as a young person, right? If you just sit there and you try to study and you're not making progress, if you do something different, your brain is still working and things come together. So in his case, all of a sudden it all came together and he wrote 5 papers that were very foundational in a very short time. So, if someone thinks you're going off and hiking and sort of goofing off, just there are people that have done well. Okay, so what were these 5 papers? So 2 of them were what we would now call frequentist and 3 of them were Bayesian, which back then was called inverse probability. So the term Bayesian showed up a little bit later. The important thing is that his dissertation, which was really these 5 papers, was the first dissertation to contain any Bayesian content. And he was Jeffries' only statistics student. All of Jeffries' other students were geophysicists. So this was a unique case. So what were these papers like? The sort of frequentist ones were various things about maximum likelihood. So likelihood, Fisher had just put together the theory of likelihood in the 1920s. So now different pieces had to be worked out, right? All of the big idea was there, but things like consistency, when can you actually find the maximum, all that stuff that we now study in textbooks, all of that was being worked out. And so some of this was what my father did. And then there's also this whole thing of sufficient statistics, right? So now think about sufficient statistics as you've got a whole bunch of information, but not all of that information is useful for what you're trying to do. So intuitively, sufficient statistics are really the piece of information, or how do you reduce the information and keep the core of it so that can be useful. So when you think of it in the way that you see it in textbooks, which is really what he worked on, you're looking at distributions and looking at certain statistics. If you add up if you take the sum of all of your data, is that a sufficient statistic for this parameter and so on. But the idea is really much more general. And part of what I think about now is those core ideas. How do we now extend them into our current era of big data, et cetera. So the core ideas, I think, are sort of the same, but we have to rethink how we look at them. The Bayesian papers are things like inverse probability and sufficient statistics and so on. And these ended up, so Fisher read the maximum likelihood ones and he had those published in Biometrica. He wouldn't look at the inverse probability ones. So again, the dissertation, the papers all ended up in different places. So orthogonal parameters, probability distributions and orthogonal parameters. So he wrote this paper, and again, just like the normal distribution and then the Gaussian distribution and so on, this idea was then, not everyone reads all of the papers and all of the journals. And so Brad Efron later rediscovered it. And then Cox and Reed went back in the, I think in the 80s, 70s or 80s, and said, no, this idea was actually sitting in this other paper. So, this sort of thing happens. It's not that anyone is trying to take credit for someone else's work, but this is sort of a constant theme in science anyway. Okay, so what were the themes of his research overall? One was sufficient statistics. So the idea of sufficiency goes back to Fisher, but then again, it's the technical details that had to be worked out, right? So my father was one of the people that worked out a lot of these details. And then the other one was orthogonal parameters. So all of this set of work in 1959, 60, and I forget why there was a 2-year thing there, but he was awarded the Adams Prize by Cambridge University, and he actually shared it with R.L. Smith, who was also a statistician. And ironically, we knew his work and so on, but ironically, my sister, when she was a professor at the university in math and stats at the University of New Mexico, she ran into R.L. Smith's daughter, who was, I think, an anthropology professor also at the University of New Mexico. So they ran into something, I'm like, oh, our father shared the Adams Prize. You never know, academic world. Okay, so what did he do after doing his PhD? So again, this is one of these, you finish your degree and then where do you work and do you stay there, etc. So his first job was he was a reader in mathematics and statistics at Guwahati University in Assam. And from what I know, he liked being there, the students and so on, but it was just really far away. He was from Kolhapur and at least Maharashtra, and it was, back then, like distance and so on. So then he looked for another position, and he was the first head of the sampling unit at the Bureau of Economics and Statistics in Government of Bombay. And at that point, this was, various things were happening. And in his case, there was sort of a personal life setback. And this something that was beyond his control. And this actually affected him, I think, for a good 10 years, I would say. He then left that job and he was a reader in statistics at Lucknow University. But what he was really looking for was an opportunity that was academic and in Maharashtra. So at that time, Pune University was being formed. And so he ended up being hired to develop the math and stats department at what was then called University of Pune. So he did that from 1953 until 1976. For 2 years, he was at Iowa State. But basically, this was the bulk of what he did in terms of contributing to statistics and science in India. So he developed the Pune department, the graduate studies program. It was the only statistics program for a while that was selected by UGC as a Center for Advanced Study. He guided many, many students, and even the ones that he guided informally, like I still run into people. A couple of years ago, I was at Michigan State and I had this conversation with Dr. Hira Kaul, who I think got his master's in the Pune department. And he was telling me the story about how he was ready to quit. And my father sat him down and said, no, think about this. And that's how he ended up continuing. So, there's a lot of formal, students that were formally his students, and then other students that you just sort of run into and help. And there's a long list of people that he did this with. And I remember some of these people as well. And some of them are here. But what I remember is there was a lot of travel. He was always, as a child, when we lived in the Pune University campus, he was gone, traveling more often than there. And it was, for me, it was sort of exciting when I was a child because he would fly to places, which was not that big a deal because I wasn't going, but he would always save those little things that they gave on airplanes. So that was, the highlight of my life. So I'd get these little chocolates from Indian Airlines or whatever it was. But, you think about this, right? This was how I remembered it. But what was really happening was He helped start a huge number of departments around the country and on and on. And I think probably Dr. Deshpande knows this a lot better than I do. And one of the things that he did was he had a lot of contacts in the UK and then later in the US, and he used these to get notable statisticians to visit India. So at one point, I remember as a grown-up person now, after my PhD, I ran into Eric Lehman at one of the stats meetings. And so this is Eric Lehman, testing of hypothesis, etc. And Professor Lehman was like, the best students they got were from the University of Pune department, and then the second best ones came from ISI. So this was the ranking back then. So the Pune department was the first one to teach measure theory, which back then was, new for statistics, right? At this point, I personally would be saying, let's not teach measure theory, that's a different thing. Okay, so all of this culminated in 1974, he was awarded the Padma Bhushan. Okay, so now let me show you a couple of photographs. So this is, and again, I picked out what I could quickly find. So in the background is my father. So this was when Harold Jeffries visited the department sometime in the 1950s. Okay, so the usual thing, all of these people gave talks, they interacted with students and so on, which, if you think about it, in that era, to get notable people from abroad was a big deal. And I think I'm right that it helped the students in the department and the other professors and so on. In 1961, and I know this is 1961 because I have Fisher's Design of Experiments book autographed from February 1st, 1961. So this was Fisher visited the Pune department. Then this is a photo with his nephew, the astrophysicist Jayant Narikar, and we have a little video later on. And so Jayant Narikar went to Cambridge. He also got the Adams Prize a little bit later. He also got, he surpassed most of his relatives. I think he's probably a familiar figure, so I'm not, this is, I'm guessing this is in the mid-60s when he came to visit, because I think the background back there is that building in Pune University, that main building. So personal life, let's talk a little bit about personal life. So from 1953 to 1959, he devoted all his energy to the math and stats department. That was basically, he lived and breathed that. And then by the late 50s, his friends and relatives hoped that he would reconsider getting married, not just ignoring his personal life, actually. And so Professor D.S. Agashe, one of the three who was at Cambridge with Sukhatme and Narikar, he and my father were probably best friends. And he is the key person that convinced him. He was the key influence. So in 59, he and my mother got married in Nagpur. There were no relatives around. The reason it was December 26th was because it was in between semesters. He had no time was to be taken off. All of that changed slowly, but this was how he was back then. And he was then awarded the Senior Fulbright Award to visit Iowa State University. And so I was born right in the middle of that Fulbright thing. So that's me as a baby and my parents. From 64 to 76, so Professor Bancroft at Iowa State wanted him to stay after the Fulbright. And apparently my parents deliberated quite a bit and decided he was sort of attached to the department and various siblings and so on. So he wanted to go back. And my mother was very attached to her siblings, especially her youngest sister. So they decided to go back. And then my sister was born in 66. In the late 60s, he visited the Soviet Union. I vaguely remember that because, it was just such a big event, right? And then I think Professor Deo remembers my aunt, Jayashree Gadgir. So she came to do her master's in the department and she stayed with us. So over time, there were different family members that also got connected to the department doing their degrees and so on. And she actually finally taught computer science at Symbiosis till she retired. So we lived in, so where the statistics, now the stats department and the math department are on the university campus, right across from it was where we lived. So back then, all of the professors that started the departments, they lived on campus. So this was what the house looked like then. Now I think it's part of the ladies' hostel, right? All of that has been expanded into it. So this is around 1970. And then by the mid-70s, my parents built a house on Senapati Bapat Road. The house is now gone, and it's where Bank of Baroda is, like across from Chaturshingi. So this was the Satyanarayan for that house, around 74. And then I think this is around 1975. So this was right before we left to go abroad again. And this was in the front part of that house, outside. Okay, so now the last part, right? 76 to 91. So why did he leave India in 76? So he had this whole illustrious career at the Padma Bhushan, things were going pretty well. So now again, you have to think about, you can't just work in a vacuum. What happens in society around you affects you. And at that point, so 1975, 76 was emergency, right? Emergency rule, but more than that, the retirement age was being reduced. And so when I was born, my father was 42. So we were relatively young. And as the retirement age was coming down, I think the rumor, I don't know if this was around 56 or 55 or something, but we were young. And so it became a very pragmatic decision, because if he had to retire when we were like 12 and 13 years old, what was going to happen, right? P.V. Sukhatme had come back from the FAO and he'd started an institute. But that's a pretty big endeavor, right? And you can't just sort of, Dr. Gore did this, to go from academia straight to something pharmaceutical or something else. Those opportunities were very limited in the 70s. So it wasn't just him. C.R. Rao, who was his contemporary, also went to the US at the same time. There were a huge number of Indian academics that left, and that retirement age was the looming sort of thing. So he was at the University of Manitoba from 76 to 79, and then he was at the University of Denver from 79 to 91. So where my sister and I ended up really feeling the most comfortable was in Colorado. That we have sort of this childhood memory of living in Pune. Nothing looks like what it looked like when I left, but deep down, like my home, I sort of feel like everything goes around Colorado. But he maintained close connections with the department in Pune, and there were family connections as well. Like one of my cousins who's here, Josna Huzurbazar, then did her master's in the department. So, my aunt had done her master's. So there are all these various people. One of the really good books to read, which was published after my father passed away, it's called Glimpses of India's Statistical Heritage. And they are autobiographies, sometimes biographies, depending on who is alive or not, of pioneers of Indian statistics. And so there's a chapter devoted to him, and I think it's a really, really interesting book to read. Okay, so very quickly, I don't want to take up too much time. So these are like my ideas and views, so I get to pontificate now. Okay, so what exactly, in the 20s, but especially by the 1940s, all of the work that we see in statistics books right now, so people like my father were the ones, loads of people, not just him, lots of people, their work is really the backbone of, it's really the mathematical foundations of statistics. That is what they did, right? All this theorem proving, let's do, sufficiency in this case, what happens, all of that sort of stuff. That was what made statistics into sort of mathematical statistics. That's fine. But the thing that we need to remember is that statistics did not develop as a branch of mathematics. That's not what its origins are. Its origins were completely applied science, dealing with data analysis and inference. That's really how it started. And the pioneers of statistics, we think about people like Gauss and so on, but other pioneers of statistics were also people like Florence Nightingale and John Snow. So how many of you think of Florence Nightingale, right, the mother of nursing, as a statistician? she was a member of the Royal Statistical Society. The reason that nursing, all of the hygiene stuff that she did during the Crimean War, she collected data. And all of the changes in nursing hygiene and so on were very data-based changes. There are diagrams in circular statistics, certain diagrams that go back to her that are still used. Okay, this is how nursing changed. John Snow, who's considered the father of epidemiology. This is the first spatial statistics idea. Epidemiologists claim him, but what John Snow did is intricately kept track of how typhoid was spreading and figured out that it was basically a water pump. And all of that happened because he was looking at what we would now call spatial statistics. He wasn't trying to prove theorems. He wasn't trying to come up with formulas. He was trying to figure out why typhoid was spreading and why there was sort of a spatial distribution to it. And I personally think what we've done is, in this era of sort of mathematization of statistics, which is really from the 1950s to the 80s, we forgot about people like Florence Nightingale and their contributions, and loads of other people. And we became very obsessed with things like measure theory, right? And that was also the era of smaller data sets. Whoops. So all of this theorem proving that we've been doing, right, for decades. I mean, this is how we progressed, right, in the world of stats up to now. Most of it is justification for point estimation, for interval estimation, and basically we had small samples, so we were trying to do inference for bigger samples, so we wanted to see what happens as sample size gets large, right? So that's the story with limit theorems. What do we have? The goal was inference. The goal was not prediction, the goal was inference. And it was inferring from small samples to bigger things. At the same time, we need to keep track of the fact that Bayesian inference, which was called inverse probability, was growing at the same time. But it really took off from the 1980s onwards. Up until then, it was sort of, closeted somewhere because of this philosophical feud between Jeffries and Fisher. And why did it take off in the 1980s? Because computational power started increasing and the amount of data and processing started growing. So that's really, I think, the pivotal sort of change. And we, in stats, I don't think we've kept up with that and acknowledged that completely. So for instance, Bayesian statistics, right? So the basic philosophical methodological contributions go back to Laplace. Laplace was the first Bayesian. Laplace's law of succession is a Bayesian rule. That's what it is. He didn't, the Reverend Thomas Bayes wasn't doing anything other than proving a probability theorem. He didn't analyze data. He didn't do, he was a mathematician in that sense. So from Laplace to Jeffries, so the theory of probability, the first edition was in 1939, and then the second one was in 61. And then there are books from the 60s, Box and Chow, which is a beautiful book, and then Reifer and Schläfer, which is a beautiful book as well. But all of these were things where Bayesian statistics was called inverse probability or decision theory. And it was mathematical treatment with very little applied work. So what is it? What's the key thing in Bayesian statistics that was keeping things sort of tied up in this mathematical world and not being practical? Well, basically, in order to do anything with Bayesian stuff, you have integrals. You have complicated integrals, and there are very few situations with these conjugate different relationships where you can get an answer by hand. So if all of this is seeming crazy, just think about this. You start out with something and you derive the answer by hand. Very few cases where you can do that. And so it all just looks theoretical and it doesn't look like you can apply it. So Bayesian statistics took off as we could compute because you didn't need to do things by hand. I cannot remember, I shouldn't say this, but I can't remember the last time I did an integral by hand, except when my daughter was taking calculus and needed help. And even then I would be like, let me try this out in R and then I'll confirm the answer. But that's what we do at this point. So in terms of Bayesian computation, where did these methods come from? They didn't come from statistics. They didn't come from statisticians. Markov chain Monte Carlo 1950s, Los Alamos National Lab. Why could they do it? Because they had supercomputers. This is the lab where the atom bomb was designed, right? And it was a computational thing. It was physicists and applied mathematicians. That is who came up with MCMC. Statisticians had nothing to do with it. Gibbs sampling in the 1980s, no statisticians involved. It was image processing. It was basically trying to take a blurry image and get out, signal and noise deconvolution. So there's sort of something to think about here. The things that are showing up from computing and so on, as statisticians, we're not the ones developing them. Other people are coming up with these solutions because they have problems to solve. And we're sort of sitting around and proving theorems sometimes. So Bayesian computing really entered statistics in the 1990s. And then suddenly the requirements changed, right? So like I'm a Bayesian. All of a sudden, it wasn't enough that I could figure out, what happens to priors and posteriors, or how do you get a posterior when you have conjugate families. I needed to learn how to program. And that's become the new language of statistics, really, is you have to know how to program. The mathematics is really the justification for conditions under which the MCMC chains converge and so on. That's the math part. But you don't need that in order to run an MCMC sampler. You just don't need that. What you need is to be able to program. And then the other thing, which is also different, once you can compute, you can visualize. You're not sitting there drawing histograms by hand, right? I mean, that's like pretty worthless activity at this point. We can, why do a histogram when you can draw a kernel density estimate and use a computer to do it? So all of this visualization world is really part of statistics. That's usually those first 2 days of descriptive statistics that we do in an intro stats course and then we forget about it. Well, that's where a lot of the action is now. The other thing, Bayesian methodology really thinks about prediction. So this is like a whole other conversation, but if you think about statistics, right? We take a distribution, we have data, we fit that distribution to that data, and then we start talking in terms of parameters, right? And then everybody else cannot understand us because we start talking about Greek letters. Seriously, when people collect data, there are no Greek letters. The Greek letters only come in as a tool in the middle. But what we really need is to then do that last translation and give them inference in terms of their data. And that's what I think we've been missing. And we've sort of made this, you have two groups of people, let's say, and you have, one group gets a treatment and the other one doesn't. What's the question that people want to know? Let's say it's children and we're trying to figure out whether if you feed kids, I don't know, something, they grow more than if you don't feed them that, right? So at the end of the day, what are you going to look at? Are these kids taller than those kids, right? Why can't we do the extra work in a Bayesian setting? You can, and say, okay, if this is what you fed these kids, this is what their predictive distribution will look like for their heights versus the kids that didn't get this, and compare those two distributions, which is a visualization problem, and you can compute the probability of these kids being taller or shorter or whatever. But you're coming back to the observable variables and not this weird, tools that are the Greek part. So Seymour Geiser, who was my father's contemporary, in the 1950s wrote about this. But he didn't have the computational power, right? But I think this is something really worth thinking about. So I personally did this with some students that I worked with who were in soil science. It took me 10 lines of code to write the RJAX program for them. But when they could see the posterior or the predictive distributions for bulk density from land that had been reclaimed from mines and ones that had never been mined, it was like we finally connected. And they could actually, they were like, I know how to do this. I collect the samples, I go into the lab, I do the bulk density measurements. So if you can talk to me about bulk density as the inference, the prediction part, the whole pipeline makes perfect sense to them. Before that, I used to talk about, mu1 and mu2, and here's what Here's what the confidence interval looks like for mu1 minus mu2, and their eyes would be glazed over. So anyway, so this is me personally. I've learned quite a bit about how to do this. Okay, so finally, so statistical data, so people like my father and others did all the foundational work for statistical inference. But now we have to change this. So even if we think about the mathematics, right? Do we need to concentrate on measure theory as much, or can we start thinking about differential geometry? Because differential geometry is where really you can think about data reduction, you can think about subspaces and so on. Instead of teaching the same material, I think we need to start rethinking this. And the biggest thing is data science, analytics, machine learning, whatever we call it, those people, what they're doing is solving problems. And if we, as statisticians, I think we've spent a lot of time saying, but we know how to solve problems. But I think the key thing is we're not necessarily doing it. We used to do that, but I would say we got diverted. And it was a necessary thing to make sure that the math and the theory is solid behind what we were doing as applied work. But now we need to come back and redo that. These are the views that you see from statisticians right now, right? So there's the defeatist attitude, which I had this conversation a couple of years ago with someone who's a very well-known person and did a lot of stuff in image processing and so on. And as a statistician, he basically said they've beaten us, they being the machine learning, AI, et cetera people. I'm like, no, they haven't beaten us. You can't give up, because it's not us versus them. It's about leveraging the best of both of these things. And then there are those that are sort of aloof in some sense. Oh, well, all they're doing is clustering and then they do some t-tests. Well, we've been doing that for 100 years. But we're not solving anything. So this is sort of my frustration right now. Okay, so very last slide. So if we think about basic statistics as we teach it, right? Sampling. What do we do in sampling courses? I remember being bored to death in sampling, because everything came down to that 1 point estimate, then a ratio estimate. You say, what are we doing, right? What's the big idea? Is the information that we are dealing with, is it representative of what the bigger population is, right? So think in terms of data that people are using. Electronic health records. There are basic sampling things that as statisticians we need to rethink. Electronic health records are not set up for science. They're set up as an accounting system for billing. And we're using that in order to do science, in order to learn about various health things and so on. There are, you have an electronic health record in the US, for instance. You have an electronic health record if you have insurance. If you don't have insurance, you're not in this system. So they're biased samples, but this is what's being used. So if we don't speak up and try and figure out how to take that and make some sense out of it, all of this inference is going to be done on biased samples, right? In our terminology. Missing data. We have a huge literature on missing data. So when I was chair of the data science, department basically at WVU, we were interviewing students, we were interviewing for positions. And on more than one occasion, there would be a computer science candidate, and the level of imputation would be part of the talk. And the level of imputation, basically, I would just be horrified. It was basically what Yates did more than 100 years ago in the randomized complete block setting. If you have a cell missing, you average across row and column. There's a huge literature on imputation. Why is it not getting used in data science? Because of translation, right? We refuse to communicate. I'm just sort of saying this colloquially now, but it's very hard for people that are not trained statisticians to understand all of that literature. And we can't just say, oh, we have it somewhere in our annals of statistics and so on, so you can't be doing, we need to communicate better. Measurement error. In these modern data sets, there's measurement error all over the place. So like one of the examples in the US, this constantly shows up. How is race defined? For a long time, you had to belong to one class. So if your parents, your biological parents were two different races, you had to pick. Well, that's silly. Because if we're going to say someone is African American and white, one parent is African American and one parent is white, why can't you click both of those? Why are you not allowed to do that? So a lot of the data that we're using what is being collected with completely different, sort of social, et cetera, constraints, and people are using it as data. But this is, again, a sampling, measurement error, et cetera, issue. Dimension reduction, right? So most of our methods, for the most part, were set up for big and small p. Small number of variables, lots and lots of samples. We're comfortable in that world. It's all reversed now, right? Small n, large p. So genomics data. You have patients, for the most part, you're going to sequence, 10 here, 10 in this group, 10 without the condition, because it's incredibly expensive to do this. But you're getting huge amounts of data. You sequence a genome, you get, bazillions of a huge data set. So how do we deal with this? We're still struggling in stats to even wrap our heads around this. We're still trying to prove limit theorems with this. And I mean, I'm not making this up. This is what we're still trying to do. Okay, the other couple of things. Does parametric inference really have a place when we're looking at big data? What was the reason for having distributions? Because we had small data sets, so we needed to augment it with some assumptions, and then we could do some inference, right? When we have giant data sets, if we have sort of population level data, why can't we be non-parametric? Because we are computation, it's all computational anyway. And then, what is likelihood going to look like now? Likelihood is where all the data gets put together. It can be parametric, non-parametric, so we have to sort of rethink that. What's the role of Bayesian inference in data science? That does show up quite a bit, because data science in a lot of ways, it's about prediction. So you're taking current information, updating, and that's effectively how you can use it for prediction. Uncertainty quantification, beyond just confidence intervals. There's a lot more to uncertainty quantification, and I think that we really need to think about. And then there's this whole field of where people are trying to, you can collect much more data so you can refine your scientific theories. So a lot of times people will have models that are partial differential equations models, and that'll be a layer with data and so on. Okay, so there's a huge world out there, but the biggest difference is we can't tackle it until we start thinking more computationally, because we really can't do anything by hand anymore. Not because we're not competent, but the problems are different. So anyway, that is more or less what I wanted to say. Hopefully it made some sense. So I'm happy to take questions. And should I just turn this off or what? Okay, if anyone has questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed the entire presentation, and I would split it into two parts. The first, your personal part, and the second, your technical part of data science. And I carefully read the presentation. I read one term, RJAGs, RJAGs.
Okay, sorry. So, whoa. So Bayesian computing, about 20 years ago. Okay, so in order to do any of this Markov chain Monte Carlo sampling, in the old days, which was 20 years ago, we used to have to program everything. So it became stupidly tedious because you're writing samplers. I mean, you're like writing a huge amount of code. So this team at, I think MR's Medical Research Council at Cambridge came up with what was called bugs. What does bugs stand for? Bayesian updating using Gibbs sampling, something like that. But the acronym was bugs. And the great thing about bugs, when it came out about 20 years ago, everyone was excited because you didn't have to program as such. You could write down your model as a graphical model. You would tell it what your data is, etc. And you would click on things. It was a Windows application. You would click on thing and you would sit there and see if the chains are converging as the sampling is happening. So over time, we then started calling it, I'm tired of babysitting bugs, because you have to sit there, oh, this one's converging, this one's not converging. So Andrew, what is his name? Plummer, I forget his first name. He was at the World Health Organization in Geneva. And he's sitting there. So he wrote JAGS, which is just another Gibbs sampler. And the babysitting is gone. So JAGS, the language is very much like R. And so our JAGS is the R interface. It's basically an R package for JAGS. And what you write is exactly what you would write on paper. So here is my likelihood, here is what my prior is, and then stuff happens. You have control over stuff happening. But it made the programming accessible for everyone. And more than that, it made the programming accessible. It didn't matter whether you used Windows or you used Linux or whether you used a Mac, which for me was giant because I don't deal with Windows. Some of the people I work with are Windows users. I can send them exactly the same file, they can run it. So these are all of these little things, right? So this is what has made things so much more accessible. Does that help?
Yeah, definitely. Also, one small question. I didn't know that your grandfather and great grandfather was from Kolhapur. मला विचारायचं होतं, तुम्हाला मराठी पण येतं का?
At the level of a 12-year-old.
Thank you.
Because that was when we left. Any other?
Good afternoon, ma'am. It was a pleasure listening to you, and it was close to the heart more because I come from an industry background, working for 18 years at an automobile company. One thing which I really, and it was very close more because the way you have been saying that solving problems, you actually work around with problems and then you come up with stuff rather than imagine stuff which is gonna be used someday by someone, I don't know when.
Yeah, my sister and I used to call, she also did her PhD in statistics. And so we used to call it have model looking for data.
Yeah. So my modern question, I think what I want you to deliberate upon majorly because we are a group of people who are actually trying to look for applications, right? So what happens is we are trying to isolate ourselves as statisticians. Eventually what happens is statistics are, the way I understand it, my little understanding, I feel it is something which is always going to be integrated into various subjects, various areas. It could be technology, like AI we are speaking about, it could be engineering, we're talking about coming up with better predictive models, problem solving per se, which is actually using a lot of statistics these days, where engineers are like, rampant upon it. It could be epidemiology everywhere. Actually, I think every science is actually using statistics, and I feel that more with the NEP in place, that is the new education policy in place, I think it will be more relevant for us to integrate stuff rather than only isolating and saying that okay, I will only do this part of it or I will only do that part of it. I think which is something which I feel. So what kind of integration mechanisms are prevalent right now, or which are the ones which are coming up? I know about few which are there, but what else is the future which can be seen with respect to such integrations, maybe from the developed world countries?
Yeah, okay, that's a big question. Actually, Dr. Anil Gore, who's down there, so he just cross-examined the students and their professor who came from Satara, right? So he had been there at their college, and this is how I think integration happens in the education part, right? So his thinking is very much in terms of consulting, right? But it's the same sort of thing that I think about. So he had been there, and he brought in, I think it was students from botany or zoology, and who had data, and he made the statistics, set up this interaction so that they could talk to each other. What I think in the education process, right, from the beginning on, I think we have to, what I have done with my students, so master's students, PhD students, And I did it myself because I didn't know anything about any of the other disciplines when I started. And when I was hired at the University of Wyoming, it was an applied statistics department, and the department chair said to me, "You are, we've hired you, you're good and everything, but you're very theoretical. This is an applied stats department, and yes, we expect you to get grants and do theoretical stuff, but you have to work with people around campus." So I took that very seriously because I wanted to get tenure, and it turned out to be just wonderful. So a lot of the connections that I made were from going to talks in other departments, being on, just sort of showing up when people were discussing their data problems. But it took a huge amount of time. Like I worked with these glaciologists, people that go up on glaciers and do research. I've never taken physics. I had to teach myself all of this, the physics in order to get to the geophysics. But I finally understood how they collect data, why the science is important, how the data integrates, and so on. Then I had a couple of students, a master's student and a PhD student, so I would make them come to these group meetings. Because in the other sciences, there is a huge tradition of having groups, right? It's so-and-so is the professor, these are their postdoc students. We don't have that. We don't really need that the same way. But I think you learn about how other people are doing stuff by attending their group meetings. So I did that with evolutionary bioinformatics. And in that case, that professor and I and our grad students, we would meet once a week. And it started out with, I couldn't keep straight anything, right? I'm like, I didn't really take biology. So what are the definitions? I have no idea, it's basic language. But then it comes down to understanding the problems. And it isn't until, the worst thing, and I just don't let people do this at all. I don't want to see your data. I could care less about your data. Sit down and tell me about your problem. Tell me about your science or social science or whatever it is. Because if you cannot explain to me why you're doing the study that you're doing or collecting the data, whatever it is, I have no hope of analyzing the data. And it's communication. It really is. And some of it has happened very, very differently. I mean, it doesn't always happen formally. Like one of this sociologist that I work with, we started talking because our children were the same age, and we would go pick them up from preschool, and their last names started with the same letter, and their cubbies were next to each other. And this is how we started talking, because we would be waiting till the kids were being done, finishing up their stuff. And she's like, "Do you know how to do such and such?" I'm like, "Yeah, we could do this," and we still work together to this day. So it's not just this formal kind of thing. It's the personalities have to match, and you have to be interested, and the other person has, it's not, that part is not a science. But I think the worst part is when we train students in a vacuum, and we act like, we are here, we are the statisticians, data scientists, whatever, and we will solve your problem. We have no idea what their problem is. That's not how problem solving happens. It goes back and forth. I mean, with some of these, like I used to, a sedimentologist who actually passed away, Paul and I used to yell at each other because we just, there were heated arguments about stuff. And my daughter, when she was young, I tried to tell her, this is how science happens. That's why you're good at it. You're so argumentative. But that is how science happens. You have to, you have to clarify ideas. You have to, so it's all, I don't know, it's a whole ecosystem of how to do this. But I don't think we should be working in a vacuum. We're not pure mathematicians.
I agree so much with you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Sure. Yeah, good to chat. Or just loudly.
Hello, ma'am. Professor, it was a great honor and pleasure listening to you. My question is small data still relevant in today's time?
So, yeah, people are still collecting small data. I mean, in some cases, that's all, not everything is big data. So it is relevant, but I think the sort of inference we've been doing, maybe we need to rethink. Like for instance, these soil science people that I was talking about, all of their data sets are small. But the questions that the way I was trained, the way I was doing ANOVA and so on, that wasn't meaningful to them. It was once I started giving them predictive distributions and looking at the probabilities, then it made a lot more sense. So I would say even for small data, I think we need to rethink ending the inference at comparisons which are really based on whether a certain parameter is different or not. I think in a Bayesian setting, you have observables and non-observables. The observables are what you collect data on, stuff that you have some hope of, variables. So I think we have to go from the unobservables, which is where we usually end, one more step to the observables. So yeah, there's still, I don't think the small data is going to go away. But what's going to happen is, what is happening is sometimes you have small samples but big amounts of data, and sometimes everything is all big data. Sure.
Thank you, Snehalata ma'am, for the insightful session, and I humbly request you to take a seat amidst the audience. Moving forward, we are privileged to share messages from esteemed colleagues and close associates of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, offering valuable insights into their deep-seated personal and professional connections with him. These messages not only highlight Professor V.S. Huzurbazar's extraordinary contribution, but also illuminate the profound impact he has left on those fortunate enough to collaborate with him. We are especially grateful to note that although some professors couldn't join us in person today, they have thoughtfully conveyed their sentiments through heartfelt video messages and written texts. Let us now immerse ourselves in these heartfelt tributes, celebrating the enduring legacy of a distinguished scholar and mentor. First, now I would like to invite the professors who are present amidst us today. Professor Dr. J.V. Deshpande, an Emeritus Professor, Department of Statistics, SPPU, and I request you to take the podium, sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here today. When I agreed to come here, I didn't anticipate such a rich feast of a lecture that Snehalata delivered to all of us. It was extremely interesting to see how the last 80 years of the subject of statistics were intertwined with her father's and her life, starting with the very foundational statistics that V.S. Huzurbazar did and what she's doing now are poles apart, but there is a continuum, and I'm very, very happy that I came and listened to her. She has covered Professor Huzurbazar's life more than adequately. I'll just give you a couple of remembrances of my contacts with him. I came to University of Pune as a student for the MSc course in 1960. And I came outside Pune, and then in those days there were 2 seats reserved for students coming from outside Pune University area, and I luckily got one of them, and that's how I was admitted to this course. And I continued here for my MSc and then later for PhD. When I started on my PhD, Professor Huzurbazar was going away to Iowa in 1962, as she mentioned, and I, either by choice or by just happenstance, I worked with Professor V.P. Bhatkar for my PhD. And he also went away to North Carolina in 1964. So I was without a guide after that for a while. But then Professor Huzurbazar was there, he supported me. Particularly, I was getting the Government of India Research Training Scholarship. And the government from Delhi would never send the money to the University of Pune in time. And the University of Pune would give us an advance if we applied for it. So I had to write an application to the university and saying that I'm in dire need of money and this and that. And so please give me an advance for this month's scholarship. And Professor Huzurbazar knew all about this. He said that you write it every month, I will sign it and take it back to the office and they will give you the money. So that's how I got my month-to-month scholarship from the university. And then when I completed my thesis and was going to go away, I had got a job in the State Bank of India, as a matter of fact, and I was going to be posted in jail. And I went to him to say farewell. And he was very happy that I was getting a good job, even though not connected with statistics at that point of time. And I said bye to him and went out, and just I was stepping out of the department, and a attendant from the department came running to me and said that Sahib ne bolole tumhara. So I went back to his office, and what he had called me for was to tell me about a good hotel in Ujjain where I could go and stay. And that was extremely nice of him. So after that, he, with his family, including Snehata, came and saw us in Chandigarh one time. And that was a very happy get-together for all of us. The years that he was in Cambridge, C.R. Rao also happened to be in Cambridge working with Fisher. And there were other people also. Professor R.P. Bamba, who was the chairman of the mathematics department in Punjab University, was also working in this mathematics department at Cambridge University at the same time. So they all were together, and they all came back to India and had very, very distinguished careers here. And it is a very good thing that Symbiosis has started this series of lectures. I hope the subsequent lectures will also be as interesting as today's lecture. Thank you, Sneh.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I would request you to remain on stage, and meanwhile, I would request Professor Dr. Sharbati Shukla ma'am to felicitate sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, ma'am. Next, we have Professor Dr. Anil Gore, who is the former Vice President, Statistical Services Cycle and a visiting faculty in University of Michigan, also an Emeritus Professor, Departments of Statistics, SPPU. I request you to take the podium, sir.
I came to Pune University as a student in 1966, and the reason was peculiar. I did my bachelor's in Ruia College, Mumbai, and my teacher there, I was really devoted to him. He was for me a very great teacher, and he advised me that it was obvious to him that I was going to continue for a graduate program. He said, rather than going to Mumbai University, you should go to Pune University. And I took that advice and never regretted that. So I come to Pune, a young man from a lower middle class background, basically a rural background. And one after another, you have these people who say things which I had never heard before. So our chairman is a PhD from Cambridge. Then the next prof who takes the class, he has a PhD from North Carolina. And the next prof who comes, he says he has spent all his time in Australian National University and so on. I mean, we were absolutely dazzled. And the people seemed to really know what they were talking about. But apart from that, one wonderful thing, see, in those days there were very few books. And teachers had to teach us in detail materials, and they usually wrote on the words. So those were called notes, and we would copy all the notes very religiously. Some were more religious than others. But that revealed one feature of the teachers, and I was wonderstruck by the fact, because I lacked that many of my teachers had absolutely marvelous handwriting. And VSH, Professor Huzurbazar's handwriting was first rate. And he wrote a lot on the board, but it was a feast to the eye. But he was not alone. Professor Arke, outstanding handwriting. Professor Karshikar, beautiful handwriting. And even younger ones, Dr. Deshmukh. So some of my colleagues had marvelous handwriting. And I envied them all. The only thing was that there were some people who were worse than me also. So I was okay. What is the other memory? So I took the major theory course from Professor Huzurbazar. And as ill luck would have it, I was very bad in mathematics. But I survived and I passed my MSc. But one of my memories is that I had interest in social sciences. So I would often go and attend seminars in social science building. And in one seminar, wonders never cease. I and Professor Huzurbazar were attending the same lecture. I even remember in that building, and there was some time, and we were, waiting for the speaker, and he took the initiative of talking to me. And I even remember who the speaker was. It was a political science person, head of political science from Mumbai University. And he said, I always want the best people to come to my department. I remember that one sentence that he said. I didn't know how to respond to that. And I only once saw his handwriting on paper addressed to me, which was long after I left the department. And I was working in Southeast Asia. I eventually wanted to come back to my alma mater, and I wrote to him about possibility of a job, and he wrote one of those aerogram letters. And of course, the handwriting was the same, very beautiful to look at, and he encouraged me to come. By the time I was ready to come, it was emergency time and so on. And he was, I think he probably was already gone to USA. So I was interviewed by Professor Araki and others. Anyway, so I had this very pleasant experience, my first experience of attending classes of people who had actually studied and worked abroad, my first experience. So I told one of my friends that it was a 2-story building, and the classroom was on the ground floor, and the teachers' offices were on the first floor, and they would come down the stairs, and we thought of them as angels, coming down from clouds. So it was, I think one of the great things that happened to me was to decide to come to study statistics in the University of Pune. So I'm very grateful to the university and to this one man who really built the department. Because of him, when I was here as a student, luckily for me, there were 20 full-time teachers from all parts of, basically from India, but who had studied and spent time in all parts of the world. So I'm very grateful to Pune city for getting me this wonderful education. And I was a bit on the defensive when I went to work abroad also. I thought that many people would not have heard of Pune. So if someone asked me where you are from, instead of simply saying I am from University of Pune, I would say humbly that I am from a place called Pune. And there was this prof from Pittsburgh, and he said, why do you say that? I mean, this is a very well-known place. You don't say I am from a place called Pune. I have colleagues from your university. So I felt very assured. So it has been a great time to come to Pune, to study in the department and then to work here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I request you to remain on stage, and I invite ma'am to felicitate.
Next, I would request Dr. David Hangal, former HOD Statistics, Pune University, to take the podium.
Good afternoon to all of you. Actually, I came much later to the Department of Statistics. I joined actually in 1988, and I am very fortunate to do my MPhil and PhD in the Department of Statistics, where Prof. Huzurbazar founded the Department of Statistics. And when Huzurbazar was the head of the Department of Mathematics, at that time it was combined, Mathematics and Statistics. But Statistics Department is well known, and Statistics Department is prominent and dominant department, even though it is combined with Mathematics that time. It was well known that time. And I'm just going to tell you three things in the department which happened to me. First of all, I did my education, MPhil and PhD in the department. I'm very much fortunate to have the study of MPhil and PhD in the Department of Statistics. That is one thing. Second thing is, I am the student of the Professor Huzurbazar. Professor Kale, B.K. Kale, he was a student of Professor Huzurbazar, and Professor Kale is my PhD supervisor. I am a grand student actually of Professor Huzurbazar. That is the second fortunate thing. I got it from the Department of Statistics. And I joined the department and retired in the department just 6 years back, and almost 30 years I spent in the Department of Statistics total. That is my third fortunate thing. I learned a lot during this time, and all is all due to the main thing is nice department and so much facilities and all other well-established department that I got it in my career. And thank you very much. I also thank Professor Sharvil Shukla for your invitation and be part of this function. Thank you one and all.
Thank you, sir. Sir, I would request you to kindly stay back on stage. And Sharvil ma'am, I request you to felicitate sir.
Next, we would like to invite Professor Dr. Sheila Deo, former visiting faculty, Modern College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Pune. Ma'am, request you to take the podium.
Hello, all respected teachers, students, and others. I am the student of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar from 1967. I joined this department of combined department of mathematics and statistics. Ours was the first batch when semester system was introduced by Professor Huzurbazar. Previously, MSc Part 1 and Part 2 was there. So, Professor Huzurbazar was keen on making new subjects in the syllabus, and semester system, after each semester examination was there. Previously, even students can appear for examinations after 2 years for all courses. That was possible earlier. But we have 4 theory courses, 1 practical course for statistics, and at that time in India, ISI Calcutta, Bombay, Gujarat, and Dharwad, Delhi universities were there. The founder member, VSH, has plan and construction of the building, and under his supervision, the building was constructed. Mr. and Mrs. Huzurbazar has done Bhumi Pujan of this first building. Previously, there was no building for statistics and mathematics department. lectures were taken in the arts faculty for the students. And as a professor told, that two-storied building and etc. And when I joined, one professor Bhapkar was there, one reader Dr. Adke was there, and two lecturers were there, Dr. D.V. Gokhale and Professor Tamankar, and also two demonstrators in statistics. And it was a big task for Professor Huzurbazar to attract and appoint good qualified teachers at that time. And generally, Professor Bhapkar left after 1 year to USA. Professor Shanbag came, who was doing research in operations research. Tamankar also left to USA for his PhD thesis, and that's why there was shortage of staff. And at that time, I remember Professor Kharshikar was a research student of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, and because of shortage, he has also taken Professor S. Biswas from Calcutta, and he was also doing research under demography. He has collected some data and has some models built up for that. And he got his PhD thesis under the guidance of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, and after completion of PhD degree, he also left. And that's why. And I also remember one person, Professor Tatke, who was from Hindustan Antibiotics. He has submitted his PhD thesis under the guidance of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar in statistical quality control. And I also know that Professor Kharshikar got PhD under the guidance of Professor Huzurbazar, as well as Professor B.K. Kale had extended Professor Huzurbazar's maximum likelihood estimation work and got PhD under his guidance, but went to Canada and established the department there. So after few years, he wanted to come back and take care of his parents. So he was appointed as professor by Professor Huzurbazar. And these are the four research students I know who has done work under guidance of Professor Huzurbazar. Regarding, he was a very good administrator. He was strict in teaching, and academic staff was all the staff members are afraid of him. If anybody makes mistake in his work, he used to scold him in his room. Students are not allowed to talk in the department. Silence, please, was the board in both the floors. I joined this department as a student in 1967, and Professor Huzurbazar taught two theory courses. At that time, set theory was new, and he taught both the students, juniors, seniors, mathematics students, statistics students together, and combined lectures was given by him on set theory, measure theory, and integration. And he also taught next year probability to us. When I was joined as in the beginning, after my completing MSc degree in 1969, he appointed me as a research assistant, and under the guidance of Dr. Adke, asked me to send 650 letters to different institutes, companies, organizations, colleges, departments, different university, government departments, agricultural and industrial organizations also. The statistical advice and data analysis is done here in the Department of Statistics with minimum cost. And we have built up the statistical service unit for that. And Professor Adke used to guide me to do the analysis. I remember Dr. V.P. Tondankar, Director of Virus Research Center, has collected his data on polio-affected patients from different hospitals in the Maharashtra. He collected about 505 cases affected patients in polio. Using the questionnaire, I collected the forms and information about them. And he want to do the analysis corresponding to that. And the university department had at that time 40 column punch cards were used in the machinery. Punching cards, verification, interpretation, tabulator, sorter. These were the machines brought from Britain, and IBM system was there, and big machine room was there in our department. The data of one patient was stored in each card using different columns for different answers of the questions. I have done the analysis of it with the guidance of Dr. S.R. Adke. He got PhD under Professor Huzurbazar at the age of his retirement, who was the director of Virus Research Center, now a Department of Virology in Pune. He has done his PhD, and on the basis of the data analysis done by us. I also remember the data analysis of Karve Institute at Hingne has submitted data to our statistical service unit in the department, and I have done the analysis of data of unmarried mothers, the data of lady prisoners for them. That was a good job they said to us. Dr. Mutalik Desai, NCL, Agricultural Stat, etc. were all others where they have approached us. Different universities, departments, heads also come to us, and we have done the analysis. Professor Huzurbazar told me to attend the computer programming certificate course in 1972 at Regional Computer Center at Pune, where the data input was done using 80 column punch cards. At that time, the data input was with the help of punch cards only, and 80 column punch cards were there. And at that time, only in observatory IBM 1620 machine was there, and also CDC 3600 machine was in Bombay. And so, with the help of these two machines, we could run the programs. I have done computer-oriented statistical methods, and the program was there. From the university, only two students were recommended, among which I am the one, and also one from physics, lecturer in physics. So, that is the insight for him that it is necessary to learn some computers and etc. So you should, new generation at least must know to study the things and developments in future. So that was his future insight. When we were students, we used to do practicals on hand-operated facet machines, where addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division were there. Afterwards, when some modifications were there, electric machines have come. Their calculators were there, only addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. To do the practicals on that was very difficult and boring task, really. But we have done it, and then afterwards desk computers, microprocessors, Pentiums, laptops, etc. New things are there. We have to learn all these things. So whenever we were students, from there still staff members, we have to learn. Our learning was never stopped because in 1969 I was 1 year research student assistant and then 3 years as a demonstrator. So for doing practicals, um, the demonstrators has to consider one course for each semester in practical. Statistics practicals are very important that they give the insight of what is done actually. After 3 years of my demonstratorship, I became lecturer in 1973. Professor Huzurbazar and Dr. Adke selected me as a lecturer, and I want to tell you that how Professor Huzurbazar, though he was a very great person, still looks after the staff and his students carefully. As a demonstrator in 1971, I got married. I invited different staff members, and I am very happy that even I am demonstrator, very young and younger, and still Professor V.V. Narlikar, Mrs. Huzurbazar, along with her two daughters, Snehalata and Aparna, have come to my marriage. Really, really, I was overwhelmed with their love and affection. So, and in addition to this, I want to tell you one thing, that all the correspondence with UGC committee is done by Professor Huzurbazar. He was able to get the progress and new appointments, library facilities, and also new staff and large amount of department library equipments, new equipments also, and everything he alone uses, and he has developed the department to a large extent. Ultimately, I want to tell you that Professor Huzurbazar was busy in his academic work, teaching, and all other administrative works. Mrs. Mrs. Prabha Huzurbazar, was very keen in looking after all house responsibilities, bringing all the two girls, and she was very good cook. And I have 2-3 times chance of her lunch and snacks. She was made ladies hostel rector at that time. She also always was keen on the food supplied to the ladies, and also was very keen that new modifications, new recipes, new things should be given to the ladies, and also takes care about the lady students very well. And I also want to tell you that without her good support, Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, because of her good support, Professor V.S. Huzurbazar is able to achieve fame, honors, medals, career in his success, and all the things. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. I request Sharvari ma'am to kindly felicitate Dr. Sheila Dewa.
Thank you very much. Shukla, she was my student at MSc. I have taught her. I am very glad to see the progress and career of her. Thank you.
Now, I would like to invite Professor Dr. P.G. Dikshit, Vice Principal and former HOD, Department of Statistics, Modern College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Pune.
Good morning, all of you. Respected Dr. J.V. Deshpande sir, respected Dr. A.P. Gore sir, respected Dr. Sheila Dev madam, those all are my teachers. My friends S.R. Kulkarni, David Hangal. I take this opportunity to talk about a very stalwart in the country as well as in the world. He was the first and the only professor who received Padma Bhushan Award in 1974. That was narrated by Snehalata Tai. He laid down the foundations of statistics education in Maharashtra and in India also. During 2013, on the occasion of International Statistics Year, Modern College, Shivaji Nagar, Pune, conducted a conference. And in that conference, we have published a table calendar containing contributions due to 12 renowned statisticians in world and India. That particular calendar is dedicated to Dr. V.S. Huzurbazar. Secondly, few lectures in the first year we used to give on the contributions due to Indian statisticians and statistical institutes in India. So we have deliberately included Dr. Huzurbazar's contribution, and a one-page write-up is there in textbook written by me for BSc students. Later on, that idea was accepted and adopted in other universities in Solapur, Shivaji University, and North Maharashtra also. So they have also included Huzurbazar, contribution due to Huzurbazar. He framed a model syllabi at UGC and he established statistics department at Pune University, and later on it was developed up to a stage as Advanced Studies, Center of Advanced Studies. He was a member of selection committee for staff members, professors all over India. So he selected excellent teachers and excellent education in India took place as far as statistics is concerned. He commanded great respect from students and from colleagues also. I was not his student. I joined the department in 77, and that time he left for Canada. In 76 he left. But there are so many stories floating in department, and I heard from my seniors. He was an excellent teacher, and he used to teach during that time major theory. And that major theory course was a compulsory course for all the students in department. There were 3 courses conducted in department: MSc Mathematics, MSc Statistics, and MSc Biometry. So a combined lecture by head of the department, Professor Huzurbazar, was conducted at that time, and the class was about 100 students. Okay. So students used to say that lecture as a Mahaprasad. In the first lecture, he was a very disciplined teacher. So he used to teach discipline. If a student wants to answer a particular question raised in a class, how he should stand up without making noise of the chair, he used to teach us. Similarly, while entering his office, how a person should enter his office without making any noise of door. That was also there. It was talked about his handwriting. It was a nice handwriting, and he used to write only 6 lines on board. Okay, so nice handwriting. So as a teacher, I also follow many times. I don't write 7th line on board because it should be visible to the last student. If somebody, he was very keen on the definitions and proofs. All the steps should be nicely written. If somebody writes, we have a habit of writing x1, x2, xn. He was very keen on writing only 3 dots in between x2 and xn. x1, x2, 3 dots. If 4th dot is written, he will get a good scolding from him. Similarly, if definition given by Huzurbazar is not appearing in the paper, answer book, he used to call the student. He used to ask, where did you read this? If he says that particular book, burn that book. So he is very methodical and very disciplined teacher. There are so many stories of his discipline. Once what happened, he was suffering from cough and cold and he could not speak. So he had a slate and pencil with him. He called office person and gave a message that I want this file or something that he wanted to say. The fellow, he listened and he also took his slate and started writing. Then he wrote on that बोर्ड स्लेट शाण्या माझा आवाज बसलाय तुझा नाही. So there are so many stories. He used to walk from his residence to department. He used to stay just in front of Chatushrangi temple. Bore was one of the lab attendant or lab assistant working in the department. And once I saw at the time of closure of department, he was searching one statistical table was missing or something was missing. Then I asked, what are you searching? He said that we have to take a daily count of all statistical tables, Fisher-Rates tables, biometrica tables, Barlow's tables, and all facet machines also. And then we have to report it to Huzurbazar sir. So this is his discipline. Okay, the same discipline I was also following when I was heading my department. I used to take count of all calculators and important things. So this is how he inculcated discipline in every activities in the department. We are very proud of him. His theory of asymptotic inference under the name Kramer-Huzurbazar theory we learned. So we are very proud of our teacher. He was very specific about all these things I told you. Just now in Snehda Huzurbazar lecture, he mentioned about Josna Huzurbazar. Okay. Fortunately, he was my student. She studied at Modern College, Shivaji Nagar. She stays nearby and still she stays nearby. Okay. She completed BSc from Modern College. So there are so many things which other people know and they want to talk about it. So I take leave by saluting him. Thank you very much for giving me an opportunity here. Thank you, Sharvali Shukla madam, for giving me invitation. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I request Sharvali ma'am to felicitate Dr. P.G. Dikshit. Now, I'll be reading out text messages shared by professors who couldn't join us today. First, we have Professor Dr. R.K., Emeritus Professor, Department of Statistics, Savitri Bai Phule, Pune University, who has shared a message, and I quote: At the outset, let me thank Professor Sharvari Shukla for inviting me to share with you the memories of my association with Professor V.S. Huzurbazar. It is indeed very appropriate that the first V.S. Huzurbazar Memorial Lecture is by his statistician daughter, Professor Snehalata Huzurbazar, and that too on the occasion of his 104th birth anniversary. I first met Professor V.S. Huzurbazar on 24th July 1955, a few weeks before I joined the Department of Mathematics and Statistics of University of Pune as a demonstrator of statistics. Thereafter, our association continued until 1976 when Professor Huzurbazar left for Canada and USA. Professor V.S. Huzurbazar was the founder head of the Pune University Department of Mathematics and Statistics from 1953 to 1976. I was fortunate to watch the growth of the department from a faculty of 3 statisticians to a faculty of 20 statisticians in 1976. It was not just a numerical growth of the department. Professor Huzurbazar introduced a culture of research in various branches of statistics. He himself undertook supervision and guidance of research students. He also encouraged other faculty members to undertake research activities and guide research students. This research environment was further enriched when the management and editing of the Journal of Indian Statistical Association was shifted from University of Mumbai to Pune. It was his supervision, guidance, and support that led to the revival of the journal. Now, it is one of the major journals published in India. These academic activities, coupled with updation of the postgraduate syllabus of statistics almost every 5 years, were recognized by the University Grants Commission by recognizing the department as a Department of Special Assistance in 1972. This foundational work by Professor Huzurbazar led subsequently to the recognition of the department as a center of advanced studies in statistics. The Symbiosis Statistical Institute and its director, Professor Shukla, have taken a very welcome initiative by instituting the Professor V.S. Huzurbazar Memorial Lecture Series. Such academic activities would surely lead to further growth of research in statistics in Pune and the whole country. I'm sure you would all join me in thanking the Symbiosis Statistical Institute and Professor Shukla for this excellent initiative. I unquote.
Next, we have a text message shared by Professor Dr. Anil Kharshikar, former Professor, Department of Statistics, SPPU, and I quote: I am very happy to get this chance to express my respect, admiration, and affection regarding my mentor and guru, Professor V.S. Huzurbazar, on this occasion of his 104th birth anniversary day. I had the good fortune of getting closely associated with Professor Huzurbazar for 12 long years from 1964 to 1976. First, as a student in the statistics department working towards my MA degree, then as a researcher working towards PhD under the guidance of V.S. Huzurbazar, and later as member of the teaching staff of the same university statistics department where Professor Huzurbazar was the head. During all this time, Professor Huzurbazar always impressed me as a very methodical and efficient person in the role of a teacher, guide, and administrator. I had many interesting experiences and reminiscences of this period, which actually helped me in the true sense in learning the subject of statistics in the deeper sense. For example, I distinctly remember Professor Huzurbazar suggesting to me, apparently casually but in reality, after deep thought, to study the role of ancillary statistics in the subject of statistical inference. Professor Huzurbazar worked hard towards enhancement of the Pune University Mathematics and Statistics Department, both in his expansion and advancing the subject of statistics, by attracting many promising young and upcoming workers in statistics. In the changed era, we now face new responsibilities like using the tool of statistics towards improving the perception of reality, taking into account the availability of huge data sets, which has given rise to a new subject, data science. I unquote.
Next, we have a text message shared by Professor Dr. Avinash Dharmadhikari, Manager, Quality Systems and Reliability, Tata Motors. And I quote, I joined Statistics Department of Pune University for my MSc in June 1975. Professor Huzurbazar taught measure theory at the first semester to our class. He was HOD and was known to be very strict. I remember his handwriting on blackboard, which was very neat and systematic. He used to write from northwest to southeast corner of the blackboard. Although he would not talk in the class, these notes were self explanatory. I remember him not only as my professor, but he was instrumental in starting my career in statistics. The incident is like this. I did BSc at Kolhapur in 1975 and wanted to do post graduation. However, this facility was not available at Kolhapur. We went to meet our Vice Chancellor, Professor P.G. Patil. He told us about Professor Huzurbazar's visit to Kolhapur in this regard and asked us to come see him on that specific day. As per his suggestion, we went to meet both of them. Professor Patil asked us to introduce ourselves and to tell our marks also. Professor Huzurbazar agreed to give us admission at Pune department, but also wanted us to work hard and complete the course successfully. We got admission, but initially didn't get hostel. We had to wait for 3 weeks, and within 2 days, we had to face the first internal test. It was very tough. I got only 1 mark out of 20, and that too for attending the class only. Professor called me in his cabin and inquired about hostel, library, meals, etc. and said in Marathi, अरे गधडया मगा मार्क का कमी पडले असे म्हणून पाटी धपाटा गाठला. That worked like ignition key. I took the lesson and never looked back. But that incident made me to realize his soft and caring personality behind the strict teacher. I unquote. Apologies for the mispronunciation in Marathi.
With this, we come to the end of the text messages shared by close associates of Professor Huzurbazar. We also have a video message sent in by Professor Dr. Jayant Narlikar.
Hello, my name is Roshni and I'm the granddaughter of the amazing Jayanta Narlikar. And I've taken a few of these videos, so I'm the camera girl!
Hello, my name is Asha and I'm the granddaughter of Vasant Huzurbazar. I asked some of the questions in today's interview.
Hi, my name is Ahana. I'm the granddaughter of Jayant Narlikar and I have asked some of his questions in the interview. Thank you.
Thank you for agreeing to do this interview about my grandfather.
Hello.
You had several aunts and uncles, but Vasant Mama had a special relationship with you. Can you give us some examples of this?
Well, I have, as you say, several aunts and uncles. But I was having closer interaction with Vasant Mama, that is Professor Huzurbazar, who was one of my, what I would call, helpful person outside my family, who came to help me on several occasions. So to give you an example, I was 3'4". I was jumping around in my house in order to practice how far I can jump. So once I did break my record of a jump, and I crashed into a book almirah just beyond my reach. And my foot went into the glass. Right, and the cracked glass got into my leg. It was a terrible sort of experience. Of course, I started crying, and it so happened that Vasant Mama was in our house at that time because he was studying mathematics for masters, and he was staying in our house for that period. So he came running, looked at the disaster that had happened, and he immediately made arrangements to take me to the university hospital. And he himself came with me in rickshaw, because in Banaras in those days the best communication was bicycle rickshaws, and these rickshaws were sort of slow but steady vehicles. And they took me to the hospital. The doctor looked at the wound and he said, "We will take the glass out." And at that time, I was very scared. What is going to happen? But Vasant Mama was there to say, "Don't worry, you will feel all right afterwards." So this thing happened, and I was howling, but Vasant Mama would hold my hand and say, "Quiet, you will be all right." And this, eventually it came out all right. But this was one of the examples of how he kindly helped me on a kind of emergent disaster basis.
What help did he give you when you were on your way to Cambridge for the first time?
When I was going to Cambridge, I had learned that Vasant Mama had been to Cambridge a few years before I was due to go. So the question was, can he give me some important information about going to Cambridge? So Vasant Mama was very happy to give me all the details. In fact, he thought of many various things. It's remarkable how thorough he was in picking up questions which I should have asked, but I didn't think of. So I'll give you an example. He asked me what kind of bags you are taking, because we have to take books as well as our clothes and everything for a 3-year visit abroad. So he said, "I will take you to a good shop." So we went into the camp area in Pune, and he found a big department store. And the person who went around explaining various items, he knew that particular gentleman in the shop. So he said, "Give him the best service." So that man said that I will certainly give all the information. And with the help of this man's advice, I purchased 4 suitcases, of varying kind. Some were soft and small, others were tough and very hard to carry heavy luggage. So I took 4 bags. I must say that those bags are still with me. There was that good quality. But anyway, that helped me to pack and take my bags there, and what to put in the bag. Vasant Mama gave me information what I should take with me, what will be necessary to buy there, and so forth. So this happened, and I went to Cambridge. As I went, we said, wait, I will give you some more stuff to take. So these were four letters he wrote to people he knew in Cambridge. And he requested them to help me as a new student. And he sent a small souvenir to each of them. So all those four people were very happy to get these souvenirs. And they gave me a lot of information. And of course, during my stay in Cambridge, there were numerous occasions when they called me for tea or lunch, and I had good experience of hospitality at Cambridge. This was because of Mama.
So, who were these people?
Well, one of them was Sir Harold Jeffreys, who was his teacher at that time. Then there was one Mr. Cunningham, who was senior professor at that time, but had retired now.
What did he tell you about life in Cambridge?
As an undergraduate, I had a lot of lectures to attend and then go for tutorials and various other subsidiary works. Then he said that I could go and see some of the sightseeing places people were used to go and look for in Cambridge. So there were important landmarks which he asked me to go and know about why Cambridge is important. And then similarly, he asked me whether I had read any books about Cambridge. Then he also told me where to get books, where to buy books. When I went to Heffer's bookshop in Cambridge, he had told me to look for one Mr. Stokely, who was a shop assistant when Vasant Mama was a student. So I went to Mr. Heffer's and asked for Mr. Stokely. Mr. Stokely by then had become the manager. His progress, and he remembered Vasant Mama. And he also remembered my father, who was even earlier than Vasant Mama. And he said, I am very happy to help you. And every time you come to the shop, you will look for me. So it was very good to know this contact. So there were other such things. Then he would tell me what to do when you have a weekend, when nothing else to, no lectures or anything, how I could go for long walks, etc. So he filled out my timetable, made sure that I was doing something useful all the time. And the information that he gave with persons whom he knew, people at Fitzwilliam where he was a student and I was a student. All these things help.
The prestigious Adams Prize from Cambridge. You were there in Cambridge at that time. Do you recollect how you got the news?
Well, Adams Prize is announced in the University Reporter of Cambridge. And this is an official, what I would call, communication, which comes from Cambridge University. And anybody who wants to know what is going on in Cambridge would look at that, the reporter. So this particular issue carried the news that Adams Prize has been announced. It's shared by Huzurbazar and another person. So both were declared winners of Adams Prize. So I knew that Vasant Mama had applied for Adams Prize, and for that you were asked to submit a very detailed thesis. So it is not a few pages, but a thick one. And so he had actually sent such a thesis. But when the announcement would come was not known. So I was expecting it any time around that time. So I looked up every day, reporter. And then there was this announcement. So I immediately sent a cable to Vasant Mama saying that you have shared Adams Prize. So he was very happy, of course.
Yeah. Do you recollect your visit to India in 1965 when there was a lot of news about you? How did Vasant Mama help you then?
Well, at that time, in 1965, I had come to visit India on the invitation of the Indian Council for Cultural Relations. And they had fixed up my itinerary of lectures at different university campuses. So I started going on that itinerary, started in Delhi.
Okay.
Then next was Ahmedabad. Then it was to be Bombay. Bombay to Hyderabad. Hyderabad to Bangalore. Bangalore to Madras. From Madras to Calcutta. Calcutta to Banaras. Banaras to Delhi. That is circle. So I started with Delhi and then Ahmedabad. By the time I landed in Bombay, I had become quite tired because everywhere I had to go and talk. And in some cases, they were saying, inaugurate this, do that, that. I used to do all those things, whatever they asked me. But I was tired. Finally, I got fed up. So I had sent a card or postcard or something to Vasant Mama because he was in Pune, not far from Delhi, from Mumbai, to tell me what I should do. I feel like going back to Cambridge without completing this itinerary. I'm totally fed up. So he sent me a letter saying I am coming tomorrow or the day after we'll see you in Taj Mahal Hotel where I was put up, you see. So he came and we had lunch in the Taj. And then he went back to Pune. We had a discussion. And I told him that I want to go away. I don't want to stay. So he sort of calmed me down. He said, don't. This is quite often happens in India. Distinguished people from abroad come and they are given this invitation, that invitation. So what do you do then? So he said, you are not obliged to accept all invitations. You should tell I am busy or I am having some work to do. I can't come. So he said, so don't, whatever they have fixed, only accept that. Don't give new invitation. So that I started following. I completed the whole itinerary and it became more comfortable. So his advice was good. He said, don't accept it. You are not obliged to accept.
I would like to once again say thank you to Giant Mama for agreeing to do this interview. Although I never met my grandfather, I feel like I learned a lot about him through talking to someone who was such an important figure in his life.
We hope that this lecture series continues to inspire future generations and serves as a testament to the enduring impact of Professor V.S. Huzurbazar's contributions to our field and society at large. Thank you all for joining us in this meaningful endeavor.